we really need to replenish the housing supply. And that is not a short-term proposition.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Change and the Market, your mindful guide to the ever-changing real estate world. With me, as always, is real estate trendsetter, CEO, and two-time best-selling author, Chris Masiello. Chris, how are you today?
Hey, Peyton, good to be with you.
Chris is laughing because I had to take a couple stabs at that intro. It's not. But hey, it happens to the best. So, Chris, this week we are talking about housing starts. You'll see in the post, for those watching, that we have an article linked kind of discussing the common trends that we're seeing right now, and kind of discussing how, housing starts are a big part of what we look at when we're talking about the future of the housing market. So, Chris, what are we seeing?
Yeah, housing starts, Peyton, are a really good leading indicator of people's bullishness, if you would, about housing, right? So we're seeing that across the nation, housing starts are up. There are regional differences. And I think what you have to do is kind of peel it back a little bit, is that we've really kind of built fewer homes in the last 15 years than we have really since the end of the Second World War. Like subdivisions, the way we know them, really became popular after the Second World War with servicemen and women returning and starting families and all that. And so we've used this statistic before, in the last 15 years, we've built 50% fewer homes, yet while the population continues to grow. Okay, so we know that. We've talked about that a lot. But the other piece to it is that that also means, though, that the existing housing stock that we know, houses that are, more than 15 years old, 20 years old, 10 years old, things like that, or that 10 to 20 plus range, all that housing stock has gotten older. They need new windows, they need, new furnaces, they might need new roofs, all these types of things that a house as it ages would typically need. And so there's this kind of taking old houses and then making them new, because we're not really providing enough new construction. So people are buying pre-existing homes, of course, and they're renovating them. And that's why there's such a big renovation boom. And if anyone's tried to do a renovation now to get a carpenter or a plumber or a roofer or anything like that, you have to, in some cases you have to wait. And I want to kind of use this analogy, or a historical reference, I should say, is that during the Second World War, we didn't produce any new cars, because all the auto manufacturers were tasked with defense-related goods. So a used car, so this would be maybe like 1940, 1941 to maybe mid to late 1944, was of almost the same value as a new car, because there weren't any new cars. And you have a very similar trend here now, where our existing housing stock, and all sorts of varying ages and styles. And of course, that depends on where you are in the country. And a lot of those houses are needing a lot of refit, because they just got older, and we haven't had other houses, right? Newer housing to come on to kind of soak up people's demand for something that's new. So it's really kind of, if you look at it kind of like a historical, this is 75, 80 years. You look at it historically, it's a pretty telling trend.
Yeah, there's definitely, and even you mentioned like people's desire to have new. The first house I bought was a new construction, and it was, for a first house, it was fantastic. Not having to, I didn't have to worry about maintenance. I didn't have to worry about really anything. And then of course I buy this one. It's 20 years old, and I love my house, but yeah, like roof, AC, all those things, they're aged. So it's almost, for what that's worth, it's definitely a different experience having being on both sides of that spectrum.
Yeah, and I think for people who are desirous of a new home, what a great opportunity. I have a new construction background, so I always like the latest finishes and colors, and you don't have to go in and retrofit. There's a premium to be paid for that, and a premium certainly in sales price. Although, frankly, that premium gap's not that big anymore. There's a premium gap in price. And then there's also kind of the convenience gap, right? Where when you're living in a house that's being renovated, which I did a couple of years ago, it gets kind of tiresome. And you have to remind yourself, wait a minute, this is just a moment in time. The fact that, you and your carpenter are, have become best friends, right? But it's just a moment in time, and it's over before you know it. But when you buy a new home, you're in. That's it. Now you're just into decorating and things like that, as opposed to, redoing the finishes in the house.
Yeah, that's more of the fun stuff. Yeah, no one wants to live in a construction zone.
Well, what I was going to say though is that I think what it tells you is that there is a continuing understanding, and I'll say understanding and maybe parenthetically appreciation for what's happening, the aging out of the existing housing stock, and the fact that there is going to be long-term demand for new homes. Now, new homes could be apartments, they could be condominiums, they could be over 55, they could be single families, could be any number of things. But there's a much greater appreciation for the fact that we really need to replenish the housing supply, and that is not a short-term proposition. So we're used to 2, 3, 4 year cycles, boom bust in housing, especially in new construction. I don't think so. This is going to be a long-term, call it no less than 5-year trend, probably much greater than that, where we're going to see more of an emphasis on new construction, because that's kind of really the only way that the existing housing stock can be supplemented. You got to produce more of it. And I think when you're talking about leading indicators and housing starts and permits, which is how they track everything, there's always going to be seasonal differences, because in the Northeast we don't build as much in the winter as we do in the summer. But then you've got other parts in the country that are in a warmer climate. They're building year round, and they're pulling permits in some cases at pretty brisk rates, so that they can meet the demand.
So, Chris, with all of this, housing starts. What does it mean for us? What's our take on it?
Well, there's always this sensationalism that comes about whenever there's a change. Could be economic, political, global, right? Whatever. And I think what we have to do is kind of challenge ourselves to forget the drama and look at the facts. So people are questioning, well, what's going on with housing? As a matter of fact, I saw an article the other day that said just that. Well, what's going on with housing? Right? Very sensational, but not a lot of substance to it. And so look, 3 things, right? Housing supply, we already know that we don't have enough inventory. Housing starts are getting a lot more attention, and we're seeing, an uptick in them. And both of those are really leading into forward-leaning indicators that housing is really in a pretty good place, and that we really shouldn't be, as our family CEOs, right, which is our family investment officers, which is what we are for our families, that housing continues to be and will continue to be, one of the best, if not the best, family investments we can make. And everything kind of hides in plain sight. We've talked about that before, right? Just look at the obvious, forget the drama.
Yeah, get ready, especially as Thanksgiving comes up, for those family chats. Make sure, say, I already know I'm not worrying about the housing market, no matter what Uncle Dan says.
Right. Skip the drama. All everything you need to know hides in plain sight. Just Google it.
Love that. I love that. Well, I think that's going to do it for us today on this episode of Change and the Market. As always, if you've liked this conversation, feel free to share on social media. Leave a comment if you have any questions. And otherwise, we'll catch you next week.
All right. Good to be with everybody. Thanks, Peyton.